What she couldn't have known was that Carter had been quietly collecting evidence for 63 days, and he hadn't missed a single thing. Baltimore in October has a particular kind of light. It comes in low and amber through the row house windows, the kind that makes everything look a little like a memory before it's even finished happening. Carter noticed it the way he always noticed things, quietly, from the side, without making a production of it. He was a maintenance supervisor at Johns Hopkins Hospital on North Wolf Street. 8 years in that department. He knew every mechanical system in that building the way some men know scripture, by feel, by sound, by the small deviations that warned you something was about to fail before it actually did. Among the board members he had worked alongside over those 8 years was a man named Bradley Thompson. Precise, methodical, the kind of person who noticed discrepancies the way Carter noticed failing machinery, quietly, and always before anyone else did. He drove a clean '09 F-150. He lived in a narrow brick row house in Pigtown where neighbors still sat on their stoops in the evenings and knew each other's names. He kept a workshop in the back where tools were organized by size and type, the way his grandmother had taught him. His grandmother. That matters. We'll get there. Nyla had moved into that house 7 years ago with 2 suitcases, a business idea, and the particular energy of someone who had already decided they were meant for something bigger. Carter had believed in her before she fully believed in herself. He covered their bills for 8 months when she lost her corporate job. No timeline, no conditions, no ledger. He paid $4,000 for her event planning certification on a Thursday afternoon because she mentioned she'd found a program she liked. He converted the second bedroom into a proper home office with custom shelving and recessed lighting because she'd said once, almost in passing, that overhead fluorescence gave her headaches. And it was Carter who had first introduced Nyla to the facilities director at Hopkins, a quiet favor mentioned once and never revisited that had led directly to her very first major hospital gala contract. He never brought it up. That wasn't the kind of thing he kept score on. He did all of this because he loved her. Psychologists call this pattern secure giving, investment that flows from genuine belief in a shared future, not from fear, obligation, or expectation of return. Carter wasn't being naive. He was building what he believed with his whole self was a partnership. The quiet tragedy of secure giving is that it only functions when both people are reading from the same blueprint. Nyla was not. Carter first understood this on a gray Wednesday, 3 months before the Harbor East dinner. He was sitting at the kitchen table, fixing her laptop. The machine had been running slow, waiting on a system restart. And there, still open in the browser history, were 2 searches she hadn't thought to delete. How to transfer inherited property into LLC without spouse consent, Maryland. Can I force spouse to sign over building for business? The refrigerator hummed. A car turned onto Washington Boulevard outside. Carter reached slowly for his phone, opened the camera, and photographed both searches. Then he closed the browser, waited for the restart to finish, and called down the hallway in the same voice he used every other morning of their marriage. "All done. Come try it." He didn't ask her a single question. He didn't change his face. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window. Here is the honest truth about why he didn't confront her that night. Part of him, the part that had loved her for 7 years, needed to be wrong. Wanted her to have a logical explanation he hadn't thought of. So he gave her time to offer one. She never did. The other part of him, the part that had spent 8 years learning to read systems before they failed, quietly started watching. The building he was watching over sat on Washington Boulevard in Pigtown. 3 stories of Baltimore brick, original windows, solid bones. His grandmother, Estelle Hale, had left it to him specifically. Not to the marriage, not to the household, to him. She had pressed the deed into his hands 2 weeks before she passed and made him look her in the eye before she let go. "Don't let anybody talk you out of this, baby. This is yours." Nyla called it the dusty little building, said it was a liability, said he should sell it and put the money somewhere with real potential. Carter had always smiled and changed the subject. Now, sitting in his truck in the hospital parking lot that night, staring at those photographs on his phone screen, the smile was gone. He opened his notes app and typed 7 words. "She's been planning this longer than I thought." He didn't call anyone. He sat in the dark until the parking lot went quiet around him. Then he scrolled to a contact he had never needed before and placed the call. Denise Whitaker picked up on the second ring. What Carter began building from that phone call, quietly, methodically, the exact same way he had always built everything else in his life, was something Nyla never once considered possible. Stay with me, because what Carter finds on that backup laptop 4 months later is the moment this story stops being about a troubled marriage and starts being about a reckoning. Amir Ace Donovan arrived in Nyla's life the way trouble usually does, gradually, then all at once, wearing a very good watch. He was out of Washington, D.C., event production, high-end galas, the kind of man whose business card felt heavier than it needed to. He called himself a strategic partner. Nyla called him exactly what her brand needed at this stage. Announced at the kitchen table one evening with the certainty of someone who had already made the decision and was now simply informing the furniture. Carter nodded, poured them both coffee, said, "Sounds like a real opportunity." What he noticed and said nothing about, Amir had a habit of letting his hand drift to the small of Nyla's back. Not her shoulder, not her arm, the small of her back, with the easy familiarity of a man who had been there before. He called her N in a voice 2 registers too soft for a business meeting. And the third time Nyla attended an event with him, a product launch at the Four Seasons on East Pratt Street, her wedding ring was not on her finger. She told Carter it was because rings scratched the glassware when she was setting tables. He didn't say a word. What Carter was doing in those weeks has a name in behavioral psychology: strategic observation under controlled affect. The ability to register deception without broadcasting awareness of it. It sounds clinical. In practice, it is one of the most quietly painful things a person can sustain. Every missing ring, every soft-voiced N, every evening she came home an hour later than expected. Carter absorbed all of it and kept showing up. Not because he felt nothing, because part of him was still hoping to be wrong. He wanted her to prove the browser history meant something innocent. He gave her time to do that. She never did. The misdirected email arrived on a Thursday morning, sent to the household inbox that both of them still shared out of old habit. It was from Maya, Nyla's 26-year-old assistant. Conscientious, slightly overwhelmed, the kind of young woman who made small logistical errors when she was managing too many things at once. The email contained a floor plan of the Washington Boulevard building, a recent property appraisal, and a short note in the body. "Hi, Amir," attached as requested. "I'll work on getting Carter to sign next week. M." Carter read it twice. Then he forwarded the entire thread to Denise Whitaker and typed a single line beneath it. "Start collecting from today." He did not confront Nyla. He didn't change his schedule or his expression. That Friday, he drove her to a venue walkthrough on Boston Street in Canton because her car was in the shop. He fixed a spotlight rig that had shorted out at one of her planning sessions. He carried folding chairs up a flight of stairs without being asked. He brought home Thai food on Sunday because she'd mentioned craving it. That same week, while he was up on a ladder adjusting the spotlight rig inside the Washington Boulevard building, he mounted a second security camera above the rear entrance. Small, weatherproof, angled toward the parking area out back. The building already had one camera near the front door. Nyla knew about that one. This second one, installed quietly on a Tuesday afternoon while she was across town in a client meeting, she did not. Carter didn't mention it to Denise yet. He simply wanted to know what the rear parking area looked like on evenings when he wasn't around. He didn't have to wait long. There is a principle in both legal strategy and honest human patience called strategic silence. The deliberate choice to withhold what you know until the moment of disclosure produces its fullest, most irreversible effect. Every act of continued normalcy during those weeks served two purposes simultaneously. The first was legal, time-stamped proof that Carter had continued fulfilling his obligations in good faith, while Nyla worked to strip him of his inheritance. In a Maryland courtroom, that distinction carries enormous weight. The second purpose was simpler and more personal. He was not ready to end the marriage until the evidence made it impossible to do anything else. Carter didn't know it yet, but Maya's misdirected email was only the first thing she would accidentally hand him. The voice note was the last door closing. He found it on Nyla's backup laptop, the one she used for overflow files, while he was replacing the charging port in his workshop. The audio file was dated 4 months earlier. He pressed play without knowing what it was. Nyla's voice, clear, unhurried, the voice she used when she believed no one important was listening. Carter is my safety net, okay? He is not going anywhere. I know that man. He is too good, too loyal, to him to ever just walk out. So I'm keeping things steady until I find something real, something with actual capital behind it. Once the building is in the LLC and the business is generating on its own, I won't need the safety net anymore. A pause, then the faint voice of her friend Simone on the other end. Girl, that is cold. Nyla, that's business. Carter sat in the workshop for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because he watched the second hand on the wall clock his grandmother had hung there in 1987. Then he forwarded the audio file to Denise Whitaker, deleted the original from the laptop, and set the machine aside. He went inside and started a load of laundry. What that voice note confirmed is what relationship researchers call an instrumental marriage, a dynamic in which one partner treats the other not as a person to be cherished, but as a resource to be managed and eventually discarded once it has served its purpose. What makes this pattern particularly damaging is that it weaponizes the victim's best qualities against them. Carter's loyalty, his patience, his unshakable belief in the relationship, none of these were missed by Nyla. They were identified, assessed, and deliberately sustained because they were useful. He had not been failing to see the warning signs. The warning signs were being professionally concealed by someone who understood his character well enough to work around it. Until he started watching. Over the weeks that followed, Nyla's public framing of Carter shifted steadily. At a venue showcase in Fells Point, she introduced him to a catering director as my maintenance guy. Carter shook the man's hand warmly and went to help unload equipment from the van. What he did not mention, that catering director had been his contact first, a senior administrator in Hopkins Food Services Division who had trusted Carter's professional word for 6 years before Nyla ever met him. He filed it. He said nothing. When he mentioned the Fells Point moment to Denise that evening, she was quiet for a beat. Then, in the dry way that Carter had come to appreciate, good, let her keep going. On a Thursday, 12 days before the Harbor East dinner, Carter opened a new personal checking account at a separate bank and redirected his direct deposit there. The joint household account remained open. He simply stopped adding to it. There was nothing illegal about that. Nothing that triggered a bank alert. Nothing Nyla would notice until she looked closely at something she had not been paying close attention to for a long time. Separately, he asked Denise to prepare the formal divorce filing. He did not tell Nyla. When her text arrived that week, investors want to meet the property owner in person before they commit. Need you at the dinner. Please wear something nice, Carter. This matters. He understood precisely what she needed from him that evening. She needed his physical presence, his face, his implied consent, the performance of a willing husband. One final scene in a production she had been running for months. He replied in 4 words, "I'll be there." That Sunday evening, he stood at the bathroom mirror with a tie in his hand. He looked at himself for a long moment. 38 years old, the small V-shaped scar at the corner of his left eye catching the light. The same face he had brought to 8 years of honest work and 7 years of marriage. He looked at the wedding ring on his hand. He took it off, slowly. He did not set it on the counter. He placed it in his breast pocket, close to his chest. Then he straightened his collar and walked out to his truck. Before we go any further, I have to ask you something, and I want your honest answer in the comments. If you were Carter and you heard that voice note, would you have stayed quiet and kept building your case? Or would you have walked out that same night? Drop a yes if you would have stayed silent. Drop a no if you would have left right then and there. Or maybe you've known someone like Nyla, someone who saw another person's loyalty as a guarantee rather than a gift. Tell me about it below. Because what happens at that dinner table in just a few minutes, and what one unexpected man says out loud in front of everyone, is about to completely redefine what quiet strength actually looks like. The Charleston on East Charter Street in Harbor East had a private dining room on the 2nd floor. Dark wood paneling, low amber lighting, the kind of room that understood money without needing to announce it. When Carter arrived, 6 people were already seated. 4 investors, an executive chef named Dominic who had recently left a Fells Point kitchen to go independent, and Amir Donovan, whose gold watch caught the candlelight every time he reached for his water glass. Nyla stood when Carter walked in. She smoothed her blazer and produced the smile she reserved for rooms rather than for people. "Everyone, this is Carter, my husband, well, on paper." A small, practiced laugh. "He's here in case anyone has questions about the property." Carter pulled out his chair and sat down. He did not correct her. That phrase, "on paper," was not casual. It was a calculated act of social positioning. By publicly minimizing the marriage before Carter could introduce himself, Nyla was telling the room how to see him before he had the chance to establish that himself. Psychologists call this preemptive social framing, controlling the narrative before the other person can speak into it. It works reliably on people who still need the room's validation. Carter had stopped needing anyone's validation at that table 63 days ago. The dinner moved through its courses with the unhurried confidence that expensive evenings tend to carry. Amir walked the room through the velvet room concept: experiential luxury, Baltimore community roots, premium execution. 2 minutes, polished, rehearsed. The investors responded with the measured enthusiasm of people who wanted to appear as though they'd already been thinking along the same lines. Nyla was luminous beside him, engaged, authoritative, her hand resting near Amir's forearm on the table. Not quite touching, close enough to mean something. Carter ate his dinner. He asked Dominic a genuine question about his approach to sourcing local proteins and listened to the full answer. He refilled his water glass. He was polite to the server. He waited. 63 days had passed. A few more minutes was nothing. The moment arrived midway through the entree. These moments always arrive exactly on schedule. An investor asked a direct question about the building's title status and transfer timeline. Nyla answered smoothly, confidently. "We're in the final stages of moving it into the LLC. Should be clean by end of month." And then, without transition, without warning, she turned to Carter. She reached up and removed her wedding ring. She set it on the white linen tablecloth directly in front of him, not beside her own plate, in front of him, like a document being returned unsigned. "I'm taking this back until you learn to think bigger." Her voice was even, conversational. I need a partner with vision, not a man who's only good for fixing pipes and pulling out chairs. The table went quiet with that specific silence that falls when something irreversible has just happened, and everyone present is deciding whether to pretend it hasn't. One of the investors gave a short, uncertain laugh, the reflex that surfaces when a room genuinely cannot tell if it just witnessed a joke. Amir did not laugh. He held the composed expression of a man who had known this moment was coming and had chosen to let it land exactly as designed. Nyla did not clarify that she was joking, because she wasn't. What Nyla performed in that moment has a precise clinical name: public devaluation, the deliberate humiliation of a partner in front of witnesses designed to strip away their social standing while elevating the person delivering the act. Research in coercive relationship dynamics identifies this as one of the clearest behavioral markers of emotional manipulation. It redefines the target as lesser, not in private, where they might effectively respond, but in public, where social pressure makes resistance feel disproportionate. There is one structural flaw in that strategy. It only works on someone who still needs the room's approval. Carter looked at the ring on the tablecloth for exactly as long as it took him to complete a decision he had already made 12 days ago. He picked it up. He placed it in his breast pocket, alongside his own. 2 rings now, side by side in the dark of his jacket. He stood and addressed the table with the same professional courtesy he would use at any function he attended through work. "Thank you for dinner. Enjoy the rest of your evening." He pushed in his chair. He was nearly at the door. "Mr. Hale." Carter recognized the voice before he turned around. Bradley Thompson, silver-haired, reading glasses pushed low on his nose, seated 2 chairs down from Nyla on the investor side of the table. Carter had not placed him immediately when he walked in. The room had been dim, the seating arranged with Nyla and Amir commanding the near end. But there he was, the same Bradley Thompson from the Hopkins Facilities Advisory Board. The same precise, unhurried man Carter had passed in the corridor of the Nelson Building a dozen times over 8 years. The same person who noticed discrepancies the way Carter noticed failing equipment, quietly and well ahead of anyone else. Bradley was looking at him with an expression caught between professional surprise and something more deliberate. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. When the transfer proposal came through with your signature last month, I had assumed you'd been fully briefed on the transaction structure." A careful pause. "I apologize if there's been some kind of miscommunication on our end." The ambient sound in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Carter turned slowly. He looked at Bradley. Then he looked at Nyla. The practiced luminosity was gone from her face. Whatever composure had carried her through the evening had just developed a crack that, once visible, could not be unseen. "Mr. Thompson," Carter's voice was even. "What name was on that signature?" Bradley held his gaze steadily. "Yours," or "presented as yours." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. What Bradley Thompson did in that moment, entirely without intention, is what investigators call an accidental disclosure. He was simply a meticulous man accounting for a discrepancy he had quietly noted and never resolved. But those 4 words, "presented as yours," collapsed months of careful construction in under 5 seconds. A forged signature, 6 witnesses, and the one person Nyla had needed to keep manageable was now standing at the door with full knowledge of what had been done in his name. Bradley Thompson had never been part of any plan. He was simply a man who paid attention. So was Carter. Carter turned to face Amir. "You are sitting in the middle of someone else's marriage," he said. No raised voice, no theater, no performance of any kind. Just the flat, factual weight of a man with nothing left to prove. Attempting to negotiate someone else's inheritance, using a signature that was not given to you. Amir's mouth opened. Carter was already at the door. "Carter," Nyla's voice. The practiced register was completely gone from it. Something underneath, raw, unrehearsed, had surfaced. He did not turn around. He sat in his truck in the parking garage on Alisana Street. The city moved around him, indifferent and unhurried. He opened the center console, placed both rings inside, and closed the lid. He picked up his phone. Denise answered on the second ring. "It's time," Carter said. "Move to the next phase." 3 words. Calm. Already prepared. The response of a man who had not been reacting tonight, who had simply been present while 63 days of quiet, careful preparation came into alignment exactly as planned. Nyla went back to her hotel room that night, still believing the damage was manageable. That Carter had made a statement, walked out dramatically, but that nothing structural had actually changed. That the building was still within reach. She had not yet seen what the rear camera had recorded over the past 3 months. And that footage was about to dismantle every single calculation she believed she had already won. Don't go anywhere, because what Carter plays on that tablet the next morning, right there on Washington Boulevard, is something you will not believe a person actually said out loud. Nyla texted Carter at 7:42 the following morning. "Need you at the building at 10. Investors are coming to finalize. Just sign where Denise marks and this is done. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Carter was already in his truck on Washington Boulevard when the message arrived. He read it once. He typed 4 words back. "On my way." That phrase, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," is worth pausing on. It is the language of manufactured reasonableness, a pressure tactic designed to frame compliance as the rational choice and resistance as unnecessary drama. Nyla had used this register throughout their marriage, about the office conversion, about the business accounts, about the building itself. It had always produced results. She had no experience of it failing. She was about to build that experience from scratch. Carter arrived at 9:50 and stood at the building's entrance, not pacing, not checking his phone. Hands easy at his sides, a manila envelope under one arm, a tablet in his hand. He wore the same clean dark clothes he always wore, the kind a man wears when he intends to work. The investors arrived first, moving with the cautious energy of people who had quietly recalibrated their expectations since the previous evening. Dominic the chef came with them, hands in his pockets, expression carefully neutral. Amir arrived last, suit pressed, gold watch forward, projecting a confidence that hadn't fully recovered since the night before. Nyla came in behind him, structured blazer, red lipstick, the look she reserved for closings. She saw Carter at the entrance, and something briefly crossed her face. Relief that he was there, or the performance of it. Hard to tell with Nyla where one ended and the other began. "Good, you're here. Let's get everyone inside and—" "I have something for everyone first," Carter said. He opened the envelope and distributed a stapled packet to each person present. 4 copies. Clean. No preamble. He let them read. Page 1. The original deed to 1142 Washington Boulevard. Carter James Hale, sole owner. Recorded in Baltimore City. Under Maryland law, inherited property held exclusively in one spouse's name requires no co-signature for legal protection. Nyla had spent time researching ways around this. She had not found one that worked. One of the investors turned the page slowly. His expression moved from professional neutrality to something more careful. Page 2. A certified report from a forensic document examiner. The signature submitted with the November transfer proposal did not match verified samples of Carter Hale's signature drawn from 7 years of employment records at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dominic set his packet on the stair railing beside him and took a quiet step toward the door. Page 3. A letter from Denise Whitaker's office informing all parties that the property was not available for sale, lease, or inclusion in any LLC structure, and that any further attempt to use it as a business asset would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. The second investor folded his packet without finishing it and slid it into his jacket. Amir had not been reading at all. He was watching Carter's face. "This is a miscommunication," he said. His voice carried the residual confidence of a man not yet ready to accept that the room had turned. "Nyla and I had a clear understanding that—" "Page 4, Carter said. Page 4 was a still image from a security camera, the one Nyla didn't know about. Carter pressed play on the tablet. The footage was clean: rear entrance, parking area, time-stamped from 3 weeks earlier. The camera angle was clear. In the frame, Nyla and Amir, front seat of his car, parked behind the building on an evening Carter had been on a late shift at Hopkins. Her voice, even, businesslike, the exact voice she used on client calls. "I just need to keep things steady with Carter for another 60 days. Once the transfer is signed and the LLC is in my name, he can file whatever he wants. The building is what matters. Everything else is just paperwork." Amir, off frame. "And if you won't sign?" "He'll sign. I know that man. He's spent 7 years trusting me. That's not something that just goes away." A pause. Then Amir. "You sure you can keep him in the dark that long?" "Baby, he still thinks this is just a rough patch." Carter stopped the playback. Not dramatically. The way you stop something when it has said everything it needs to say. What that recording documented, in Nyla's own voice, in her own words, on Carter's own property, is what legal professionals and relationship researchers both classify as coercive financial manipulation within a marriage. The deliberate exploitation of a partner's trust as a mechanism to extract property and legal advantage. The camera had been installed legally on Carter's own inherited property on a Tuesday afternoon while Nyla was across town. What it captured was not an argument or a moment of heat. It was a plan, stated calmly with full intention by the woman he had spent 7 years believing in. The silence in that doorway was absolute. The first investor spoke quietly without looking up from the floor. "I think we need to step away from this entire project." He and his partner walked to the street without making eye contact with anyone. Dominic followed. As he passed Carter, he gave a single, brief nod. No words, just the nod of a man who understood what he had witnessed. Carter held out one final document, this one directed to Amir. "That is a preliminary agreement between you and an event production company in Washington, D.C., dated 6 weeks ago. It assigns the Velvet Room, the name, the concept, the format, the vendor relationships, to that company. Not to Nyla, not to Lux, by Nyla." Carter held the page steady. "To them." Amir said nothing. For the first time in every encounter Carter had observed, he had absolutely nothing to add. "The camera has been there for 3 months, Carter said simply. "Neither of you ever thought to ask about the security system?" This is the moment psychologists call the collapse of the false narrative, the precise point at which a constructed reality is exposed simultaneously to everyone who had been operating inside it. No recovery available. No reframe, no alternative explanation, no version of events that fits the evidence. The story Nyla had maintained, for the investors, for Amir, and for herself, was now playing back in her own voice, at the building she had tried to take, in front of the people she had needed to believe it. Amir left without speaking. His car was gone from Washington Boulevard in under 5 minutes. He did not contact Nyla again. 3 weeks later, Denise mentioned to Carter that Amir's name had appeared in a civil complaint filed in D.C. Superior Court. brought by the very production company he had tried to use to absorb Nyla's concept without her knowledge. Carter heard this and said nothing. Some people carry their consequences with them wherever they go. Nyla stood on the sidewalk alone. The red lipstick was still perfect. Everything underneath it had come apart. She was trembling. Not the small, manageable kind, the deep kind. The kind that starts in the chest and works outward when a person finally understands the full scope of what they have done. "How long have you known?" Barely above a whisper. "Long enough." "If you had just talked to me." She stopped, started again. "We could have—" "The account," Carter said quietly. "The business account. You tried to log in this morning." She went still. She had tried at 6:15 a.m., before the text, before the drive to Pigtown, to move the Lux by Nyla operating funds into a separate personal account she had opened without his knowledge. The login had failed. Not a forgotten password, a hard lock. As the holder of 60% of the business entity, Carter had worked with Denise to file for a legal freeze on all business accounts under that ownership structure. The order had been executed at 5 a.m., 2 hours before Nyla tried to log in, and 7 hours before she arrived at this building expecting to close a deal. Carter handed her the last document, the freeze order, clean and dated, on Denise Whitaker's firm letterhead. 60%. You knew that when you incorporated. He turned toward his truck. Then her voice broke open behind him, not in anger, not in performance, in something rawer than either. Amir was going to steal it anyway, wasn't he? Not a question, not quite a statement. The sound of someone realizing, all at once, that the man she had chosen over her marriage had never planned to share anything with her either. That she had been to Amir exactly what she had made Carter to herself. A resource with a purpose, to be managed until it was no longer useful. Carter paused. His hand rested on the door. "Yes," he said. He was. He got in the truck and drove west, toward Pigtown, toward Washington Boulevard, toward the building that had always, from the very beginning, been his. Behind him, Nyla stood alone on the sidewalk for a long time after the sound of the engine faded. She believed, in that moment, that she finally understood the full cost of what she had done. She was still wrong. The deepest part of the reckoning had not arrived yet. Stay right there, because what Carter tells Nyla in that hospital parking lot on North Wolf Street is the piece of this story that will leave you absolutely speechless. The divorce was clean, the way divorces are clean when one side has documentation and the other side has run out of things to argue. Denise Whitaker managed the 11-week proceedings with the efficient composure of a woman who had handled this category of case many times before and had no illusions about how they resolved. Nyla's attorney, a younger man who had not been fully briefed on the scope of what Denise had assembled, spent the first 2 sessions attempting to establish a marital contribution claim on the building. Denise set 3 documents on the conference table. The argument stopped after the 3rd one. Nyla kept her personal belongings, her car, the business name, and the client list she had built. She lost the building. She lost the operating accounts. She lost 60% of the business structure she had spent 4 years constructing inside Carter's name. Amir had returned to Washington, D.C. within a week of the Washington Boulevard morning and had not been in contact since. His civil matter resolved itself in a D.C. courtroom without any involvement from Carter. Some fires, when you set them, circle back. 3 weeks after the final papers were signed, Nyla drove to the parking lot outside Johns Hopkins on North Wolf Street and waited beside Carter's truck. He came off his shift at 4:30 in his maintenance uniform, badge clipped to his chest, a thermos in his hand. He saw her from across the lot. He crossed toward her without hurrying, stopped a few feet away, and waited. A city bus moved past on Wolf Street. The afternoon had the particular quiet of a weekday that was almost finished. She looked like someone who had been rehearsing a conversation for days and had lost all of it somewhere between the parking lot entrance and here. "Carter?" He waited. "I know I have no right to ask you anything." She looked briefly at the ground, then back at him. "But I need to understand one thing." He set his thermos on the hood of the truck. "The Johns Hopkins galas," she said slowly. "The Hospital Foundation dinners. The Carey Business School reception last spring." She paused, still organizing it. "Those were the contracts that put Lux by Nyla on the map. The ones that made people take me seriously." A long beat. Neither of them spoke. A car pulled out of a nearby space and drove past without stopping. "Did you arrange those?" Carter was quiet for a moment, not performing the pause, actually sitting inside it. "Every one," he said. She closed her eyes. 4 years of referrals through the facilities and operations network here. He looked at the hospital building across the lot, not at her. Department heads, board members, people who had trusted my word for 8 years because I showed up and did the work right, every single day. When they needed an event planner for a function, I told them I knew someone good. He paused. "And you were good, Nyla. That was always real. You had genuine talent. The execution was yours." She opened her eyes. But the door," he said. "You never asked how the door got opened." There is a term in sociology called invisible labor, the unacknowledged work that sustains the visible achievements of someone else. We most often discuss it in the context of domestic life. The meals, the logistics, the quiet maintenance that keeps everything functioning. Carter's invisible labor was structural in a different and deeper sense. He had been the silent foundation beneath Nyla's most public successes. Every major gala, every foundation reception, every handshake that became a contract had originated in a professional network built over 8 years by the man she had introduced at a Fells Point venue showcase as her maintenance guy. The word she chose to dismiss him with was the precise description of everything that had been holding her up. "The morning after Washington Boulevard," he said, "I sent an email to 31 people. Department leadership, foundation directors, 3 corporate clients who carried you on their vendor lists because of a recommendation that started with me." He looked at her now. "I let them know that Lux by Nyla was no longer affiliated with my professional network. I recommended 2 other planners I trusted. I kept the personal situation out of it entirely." The color left her face the way it leaves a room when the light goes, slowly, completely, until the thing that had been lit was simply dark. "You built everything I had," she said. "I built the foundation." His voice was steady, not cruel, just honest. "The business you built on top of it, that was yours. The talent was yours. The work was real." He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They were both standing in the same silence, looking at the same truth. The ground it stood on? That was the part you called useless. Psychologists describe a moment in the aftermath of manipulation called full attribution clarity, the point at which a person can no longer assign their situation to bad luck, timing, or someone else's behavior. The story they have been telling themselves has been fully dismantled, and what remains is an unobstructed view of every choice that led to this place. It is not comfortable to stand there, but it is, for most people, the only ground from which honest rebuilding becomes possible. Whether Nyla would choose to build something honest with that clarity, that was not Carter's concern anymore. "I'm sorry," she said finally. Barely a sound. The words of someone who meant them genuinely, and far too late. Carter nodded once. Not forgiveness. That was its own long, separate road, And he was truthful enough with himself to know he wasn't on it yet. Just acknowledgement. She had been a real person in his life for 7 years. Real love, even when it is deceived, does not simply become nothing. It changes shape. That is not weakness. That is just the honest weight of what was. "Take care of yourself, Nyla," he said. He picked up his thermos, got in the truck, and drove west, toward Pigtown, toward Washington Boulevard, toward the building that had always just been his. Behind him, the parking lot on North Wolf Street went quiet. A man who builds with steady hands and a long memory does not leave wreckage on his side of the street. He leaves a clear road and a decision about what to build next. Stay with me for one more chapter, because what Carter does with that building on Washington Boulevard is the part of this story that will stay with you long after it's over. Spring came to Pigtown gradually, then all at once. The window boxes along Washington Boulevard filled back up with color. Kids reappeared on the stoops. Carter spent the first 3 months after the divorce working on the building, carefully from the bones outward. The roof first, then the complete electrical system. He refinished the original hardwood floors on the second floor and kept them exactly as they were. He left the brick walls untouched. He installed warm lighting and built a low stage at one end of the main floor, wide enough to run a demonstration or seat a small presentation. He did most of the work himself, evenings and weekends. And there was something in the physical labor, in the weight and honesty of it, that was converting the anger he'd been carrying into something he could actually use. He named it Hale Community Hall. The first event was a free Saturday morning workshop, basic electrical safety, entry-level wiring, how to read a circuit diagram. He ran it himself, the way it had once been run for him by older men at Hopkins, who believed the knowledge in their hands deserved to be passed forward. 12 teenagers came that first morning. He had expected 6. The second Saturday, there were 19. He partnered with Gerald, a semi-retired plumber from the Hopkins Maintenance Network, and together they ran bi-weekly skills workshops. Materials provided at no cost. Coffee always on. The only requirement? Show up. One of the teenagers, a 17-year-old named Marcus, had a particular instinct for circuit logic. Carter recognized it after the third session and told him directly, "You have a real mind for this. I want you to know that." The boy looked up with an expression Carter recognized. Someone being genuinely seen, possibly for the first time in a way that would stay with them. Near the entrance, at eye level, Carter placed a single-framed photograph. Estelle Hale, 1974. Standing in front of this same building in her Sunday dress, one hand resting on the brick wall beside the door, looking directly into the camera with the expression of a woman who had decided she intended to be here for a very long time. She had been right. Carter stood in front of that photograph one April evening, alone, after a workshop had cleared out, folding chairs still in their semicircle, Marcus's circuit diagram still on the whiteboard. He looked at his grandmother's face for a long time. He thought about the weight of her hands on that deed. "Don't let anybody talk you out of this, baby. This is yours." He had not. The anger was gone. What remained was something he recognized from his grandmother's kitchen table and from his first week at Hopkins, and from every morning he had shown up to work he believed in. Quiet certainty. The 2 wedding rings were in a small wooden box on his workshop shelf. He had not thrown them away. He had simply set them down in a contained place and moved on to the next thing that needed building. That is what the whole chapter had cost him: 2 rings in a box, 11 weeks of proceedings, and the honest grief of a marriage that had been real in some places and manufactured in others. What it had given him: a hall on Washington Boulevard with good bones and better wiring, his grandmother's photograph beside the door, and 19 young people, including one named Marcus, who now knew how to read a circuit. He would take that trade every single time. This story reminds us that the quietest people in any room are often the ones who have thought the furthest ahead. It reminds us that a person who treats their partner as a resource, a safety net, a stepping stone, a tool to be used and set aside, will eventually find themselves without the resource. And without the foundation it was quietly, invisibly holding in place. And it reminds us of something we have known, perhaps, since we were young, watching the steady people in our own lives go about their work without fanfare. The most important things a person builds are not the ones that get photographed. They are the ones still standing years later. The ones that have other people's names on them, people who were helped, people who were taught something, people who were finally seen. For anyone who has ever been called ordinary by someone living inside your generosity, who has had their patience mistaken for passivity, their loyalty mistaken for weakness, their silence mistaken for surrender, you know what you have been building, you know where the deed is, and you, and only you, get to decide who walks through that door. Thank you for being here today. Real humans created these narratives from personal observation and moral conviction. AI helped refine the structure and flow, ensuring the core lessons about dignity, prejudice, and redemption shine through clearly for every viewer. Production team story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.